I never intended to read this book. The first light novel in this series was brilliant, well written, and thought-provoking, but it was also disturbing and dark. A war novel in the sense that it drove home the senseless absurdity of war. I went over all this at length in my video on that first volume. And so even though I enjoyed the book, I wasn't sure that I could handle another book like that, at least not right away. I needed some time to mentally recover from how hard the first book hit. Fast forward a couple weeks, and I found myself still thinking about 86, wanting to know what happened next, wanting to read more of the story. So I picked up Volume 2 and, frankly, devoured the book. Is it as good as Volume 1? Well, it definitely suffers from second book syndrome. It's not as tightly envisioned, not as narrowly focused as the first book. The writing, too, is not as evocative. It's clear that in Book 1 the author was attempting to convey a specific feeling, some specific imagery. Here it's less about the imagery, less about that specific feeling, and more about moving the story forward. There were numerous sections in the first volume where the writing felt very poetic, almost stunningly so, and while there is some of that in Volume 2, there's definitely a lot less of it, and nothing to the extent of the most moving passages of Volume 1. All that sounds negative, and I don't mean it to sound negative. As I said, I devoured the book, reading it in just a couple of sittings. Book 1 was much harder for me to get through and took a lot longer to read. The author expands more on the world of 86 in this volume, showing new parts of the world and introducing new characters. It essentially takes place in the time period between the last chapter and the epilogue of Volume 1. I do have to mention two very significant downsides to this volume before getting into some quotes from the book. First, Lena isn't in it much at all. This book primarily focuses on what the 86 were up to after the long-term reconnaissance mission that was intended by the Republic to send them to their deaths. While there are occasional snippets of what's happening in the Republic of San Magnolia, most of the book takes place in and around the Federacy of Giad, the nation that was formerly the Empire, as in the empire that created the Legion in the first place. So if you were hoping for more Lena, you're going to be disappointed. The other downside is that the book ends on a pretty significant cliffhanger. Apparently this volume is a two-parter, with the second part of the story being contained in Volume 3. That may bother you, or it may not. As I mentioned earlier, the evocative, descriptive language from Volume 1 is not seen nearly as often here, but it is still present at times. This passage in particular struck me with its beautiful wording and symbolism. The cherry blossom tree at the center of the plaza stood naked and bony, without a single petal, and the clear winter sky could be seen from between its black branches. It was the sight of eternity as it turned into a cracked, shattered form on the verge of collapse. That's every bit as beautiful as anything from Volume 1, really. One of the major themes running through this book is how the 86, despite no longer being pawns of the Republic, can't escape the nature that their time in the Republic has bestowed upon them. After being isolated from peace for far too long, it did not feel nostalgic to them, only distant. The people of the Federacy want to give these kids a better life, but the sad truth is, the 86 only feel at home when they're fighting the Legion. They returned to the battlefield of their own will and plunged into even more lethal battle. They ignored the voices of allied troops who sought aid and cannibalized the corpses of dead comrades to continue fighting, as if they longed for nothing but war, battle without reason or meaning. As I mentioned in my video on the first volume, the 86 in combat are depicted by the author herself as practically inhuman. With that in mind, how do the 86 in general, and Shin in particular, manage to remain likable protagonists? Well, the author does something interesting here. Most of the people of the Confederacy don't understand the 86 or accept them for who, or rather what, they are, wanting to force them into the mold of innocent children. This includes Ernst, the Prime Minister of the Confederacy, who also acts as their guardian. Ernst was honestly relieved. Surely they would all abandon the idea of enlisting in the military now. They could finally move past the persecution their homeland inflicted on them. They could put the warrior's mentality to rest. They would no longer be 86. They would no longer be 86. Nearly all the people that Shin and the other 86 meet in this volume want to force them into a life where they are no longer 86. And Shin does not form any genuine bonds with those people. But the author introduces a new major character, Frederica, who seemingly accepts Shin and his group for what they are. She tells Shin, 3 things make a man: the homeland he was born into, the blood running through his veins, and the bonds he forms. If you have none of those and try to preserve your soul with naught but your pride, you will eventually lose your sense of self and crumble into nothing. While she has a different role in Shin's life than Lena, she has the same sort of relationship with him, a cautious but growing mutual understanding. It's through Frederica, and basically only through her, that Shin manages to retain his humanity in this volume. It will be interesting to see if this trend continues in future volumes, if Shin and the other 86 only manage to form genuine bonds with people who accept them as they truly are, as warriors. And yes, I do now intend to read and review future volumes of this series. That cliffhanger got me hooked. I hope you'll join me for those reviews. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.